The early morning sunlight filtered softly through the blinds of Marcus Hale's living room, wrapping his home in a quiet warmth that he hadn't felt in weeks. He was on leave, finally home with his wife Danielle and their 2 kids after months of consulting work. The neighborhood was calm. Haven Ridge, the kind of suburban dream Marcus thought he was buying into. Tree-lined sidewalks, trimmed hedges, polite waves from neighbors who seemed like they cared. But that calm shattered in seconds. It started with a low rumble outside. Marcus noticed the sound before anyone else. Boots pounding against the pavement, short commands barked under breath, the clicking of rifles being checked. His instincts kicked in, the kind he thought he'd buried when he left the Navy SEALs behind. He moved quietly toward the door, his daughter Alia's giggle drifting faintly from the hallway as she played with her dolls. Danielle hummed in the kitchen, blissfully unaware. Then, without warning, bell, bam! A fist slammed against the door so hard the entire frame shook. HOA compliance unit, open OP. The words made no sense at first. Compliance unit? Marcus frowned, trying to process. But before he could react, the door burst open with a deafening crack. Splinters flew like shrapnel, the hinges giving way as 4 men in black tactical gear stormed inside. They weren't police. They weren't military. But they carried rifles and wore black vests stamped with white letters AHOA UNFRCMT. Alia screamed. Danielle dropped the plate she was holding, glass shattering across the tile. Marcus instinctively grabbed his daughter and pulled her behind the couch, shielding her with his body, his heart pounding against her tiny back. Hands where we can see them? One of the men barked, his rifle trained directly at Marcus. What the hell is going on? Danielle shouted from the kitchen doorway, her voice shaking, her hands raised instinctively even though she held nothing but fear. The lead enforcer, a tall man with a shaved head and mirrored sunglasses, stepped forward and slapped a folded paper onto the wall. He shouted louder than necessary, his voice cold, authoritative. You're in violation? Unauthorized security installations on the property. You've ignored multiple warnings. We're here to enforce compliance. Marcus stayed crouched behind the couch, his jaw tightening as his grip on Alia trembled, not from fear, but from rage. You kicked my damn door down for a violation, Marcus said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. The man with the sunglasses didn't flinch. Sir, step outside. Now, but Marcus didn't move. Years of training taught him to evaluate threats calmly and completely, and everything about these men screamed wrong. The way they moved, the cheap stitching on their uniforms, the mismatched weapons. Real law enforcement doesn't operate like this, and these weren't cops. One of the other men noticed Marcus studying them and aimed his rifle higher, shouting, "Don't test us!" Step. Outside, Danielle raised her voice, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This is our home! You can't just come in here with guns." That was when Marcus saw it. The shaky hands of the youngest enforcer gripping his rifle too tight, his knuckles white. These weren't trained professionals. They were private security contractors, hired muscle dressed up like commandos, working for the HOA board like it was their personal empire. And Marcus understood instantly this wasn't about security cameras or violations. This was about control. Someone on the board had decided Marcus Hale, decorated Navy SEAL, black homeowner, independent thinker, was a problem. And now they'd sent in their little army to scare him into submission. But they'd made a mistake, a grave one, because Marcus wasn't the type of man you intimidate, as one of the men began pulling out his phone to document the enforcement. Marcus slowly stood, his daughter clinging to his shirt, his eyes locked on the leader's face. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence carried the weight of a man who'd spent years making decisions where life and death hung in the balance. The tension thickened, the room quiet except for Danielle's soft sobs. Then, as quickly as they'd come, the enforcers retreated, slapping a final notice onto the broken doorframe before disappearing into the blinding Florida sun. Marcus stood in the doorway, his breathing controlled but heavy, his daughter's small arms wrapped around his neck. The shattered wood crunched under his bare feet, and in the distance, neighbors peeked nervously from behind blinds, watching but doing nothing. Danielle whispered shakily, "Marcus, they can't do this, right? This has to be illegal, right?" Marcus glanced down at the notice, reading its bold red letters. Final warning. NFRCM and FKI failure to comply with HOA directives will result in further escalation. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he crumpled the paper in his fist, his jaw tight, his voice quiet but steady when he finally spoke. They kicked in the wrong door. He walked inside, grabbed his phone from the counter, and scrolled to a number he hadn't dialed in years. He hesitated only for a second before pressing it. The line clicked, and a deep, Familiar voice answered, Hail, long time, brother. What's the site rep? Marcus closed his eyes, steadying his breathing. 4 men, fake cops, threaten my family. A brief silence followed before the voice replied in a low, dangerous tone. Say less. We're coming. Marcus hung up, his hand still trembling slightly, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was the weight of resolve. 3 days after the raid, the splintered pieces of Marcus Hale's front door still lay on the porch like a crime scene frozen in time. Every time he walked past them, every time he saw his daughter hesitate near the living room couch, he felt the weight of something deeper than anger. It wasn't just the violation of his home. It was the message behind it. Marcus had moved his family into Haven Ridge less than 2 years ago. After 12 years in the Navy SEALs and countless deployments overseas, he thought he'd finally earned the right to give Danielle and the kids a quiet, safe life. Haven Ridge was marketed as exactly that. A secure, family-focused community. The brochures promised manicured lawns, safe cul-de-sacs, and a dedicated OA committed to protecting property values. It sounded perfect. But from the moment they moved in, Marcus started noticing things that didn't sit right. At first, it was small letters in the mailbox about minor violations, neighbors whispering warnings about keeping up appearances, and HOA inspectors slowly cruising down the streets, snapping photos of people's homes without asking permission. Most families complied quickly, too scared to cause waves. Marcus wasn't like most families. The first citation came 3 months after they settled in. Violation: unauthorized parking in driveway. Remove vehicle immediately. Marcus had parked his old Chevy pickup, the same one he'd restored with his father, at the edge of his driveway. He thought it was harmless, but the HOA fined him $250. He paid it. Then came another notice: violation flagpole exceeds maximum height. Immediate correction required. He trimmed it. A third followed weeks later. Violation: trash receptacles visible from street. He moved the bins behind the fence. Every time, Marcus complied without complaint, believing the rules were annoying but harmless, until the cameras. After 2 break-ins were reported on nearby streets, Marcus installed a set of security cameras on his property. One above the garage, one near the backyard, and one facing the street. He wasn't alone. Several other families did the same. But 2 weeks later, he received a letter that felt different from the rest. The tone wasn't just firm, it was threatening. Unauthorized installation of surveillance equipment. Remove immediately or face corrective action. Marcus read the letter twice, his jaw tightening. He'd fought through firefights in Kandahar. He'd spent years protecting American freedoms in hostile territory, and now an HOA board was telling him he couldn't protect his own family in his own home. He wrote back, calmly but firmly, explaining that the cameras were fully legal under Florida state law, citing statutes and property rights. He expected that to be the end of it. It wasn't. That's when he learned about the compliance contract. One evening, Marcus was sitting on his porch when his neighbor, Luis Martinez, approached nervously, constantly glancing over his shoulder. Luis, a quiet man in his 50s who worked as an accountant, lowered his voice and said, Marcus, you need to be careful. They've been talking about you in the HOA meetings. Marcus frowned. Who's they? Luis hesitated. The board. The president, especially? Deborah Klein. She's been telling everyone you're non-compliant, that you're setting a bad example. And now they've hired people. People? Marcus asked, his voice flat. Luis nodded. A private security firm. They're calling them a compliance team. But Marcus, these guys aren't rent-a-cops. They used to work for a defense contractor. I heard Klein say they'd make examples out of problem homeowners. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his jaw clenched. The HOA was now hiring paramilitary-style enforcers to intimidate families into obedience. That was when everything clicked. Why the so-called HOA cops carried rifles, why they wore tactical gear, why they stormed his house like it was a drug bust. That night, Marcus sat at the dining table with Danielle, spreading out the pile of violation notices and letters. Her hands trembled as she read them again. Marcus, this isn't normal. This isn't how HOAs are supposed to work? He nodded slowly. No, it isn't. Danielle leaned forward, her voice soft but edged with fear. Please, don't escalate this. We can fight them in court. We can. But Marcus cut her off gently, placing his hand over hers. Danielle, they brought rifles into my house. They scared our daughter. They put us in danger. This isn't about fines anymore. This is about control. And if they want to fight, they're going to get one. But we're not fighting them in their arena. That night, Marcus picked up his phone and scrolled through numbers he hadn't dialed in years. Names of men who'd fought beside him in the most dangerous corners of the world. Men who understood loyalty, Men who didn't back down when someone threatened family. He stopped on one named Sam Torres, former Chief Petty Officer, SEAL Team 6, one of his closest brothers in arms. When Sam answered, Marcus didn't waste time. 4 men. Kicked in my door, tactical gear. Fake badges. HOA hired them. I want eyes on their HQ. There was silence on the other end for a long moment. Then Sam's voice came back, low and deliberate. Say less. Give me 72 hours. Marcus hung up the phone, the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the silence in the kitchen. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, steadying his breath. Daniel watched him carefully, her face pale, her voice a whisper. What are you planning? He opened his eyes, his expression calm but unyielding. I'm planning to make sure nobody ever sets foot in this house without my permission again. From that moment, it wasn't just personal. It was war, not the kind fought with rifles and grenades, but one fought with precision, intelligence, and strategy. And in Marcus's world, those were the wars he never lost. 3 nights later, the quiet streets of Haven Ridge were drenched in shadows, lit only by the soft glow of porch lights and the occasional flicker of a street lamp. Most of the neighborhood slept peacefully, unaware that Marcus Hale and 5 of his former Navy SEAL brothers were parked just a block away in 2 black SUVs. Inside the lead vehicle, Marcus sat in the driver's seat, his hands resting on the wheel, his jaw set like stone. Beside him, Sam Torres leaned back, scanning a printed blueprint of the HOA headquarters building. Sam was the kind of man who didn't need to speak much. His calm presence said enough. In the back seat sat Cole Jensen, their communications expert, tapping away on a ruggedized laptop, intercepting signals and monitoring any potential police chatter. Sam broke the silence first, his voice low but steady. This isn't Kandahar, brother. We're not kicking in doors. We're sending a message. No one fires a shot tonight. Marcus nodded once. Copy that. We're here to show them the line they crossed. Nothing more. The plan was simple but precise. Get into the HOA headquarters, confront the board, present evidence of the illegal raid, and force their hand without breaking the law. But if things went sideways, Marcus knew his team was ready. At exactly 8:47 p.m., both SUVs rolled silently toward the 2-story glass building that served as the Haven Ridge Community Alliance headquarters. It sat like a monument at the edge of the shopping plaza, its wide windows glowing with fluorescent light. Through the glass, they could see the HOA board in session, 8 members seated around a polished mahogany table, flipping through budgets and paperwork. The 6 men stepped out of their vehicles, dressed in dark jeans and jackets, moving with quiet precision. These weren't hired guns pretending to be soldiers like the HOA's compliance team. These were the real thing, disciplined, calculated, and prepared. As they approached the door, Sam muttered into his earpiece, Team 1 ready. Cole, kill the cams. Cole tapped a key on his laptop, and in seconds, the building's security feed froze. Inside, no one noticed a thing. Marcus pushed open the glass door and stepped inside, his boots soft against the tile floor. The atmosphere changed instantly. The chatter from the boardroom faltered as the 6 men walked toward them, calm but unrelenting, carrying thick binders under their arms. Deborah Klein, the HOA president, a sharp-featured woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, looked up first. Her annoyance was immediate. Mr. Hale, you can't just walk in here. This is a private meeting. Marcus placed a stack of photos on the glossy conference table without saying a word. Deborah frowned and reached for them. But before she could, Sam spoke up. Those are high-resolution shots of 4 armed men entering the Hale residence without a warrant. Hired by you. One of the board members, a portly man with wire-rimmed glasses, scoffed. We acted within our rights. Mr. Hale has repeatedly failed to comply with community standards. Marcus's jaw tightened, his voice low and deliberate when he finally spoke. Your men pointed rifles at my wife and daughter. You came into my home without legal authority. You didn't just cross a line. You obliterated it. Deborah straightened in her seat, trying to maintain composure. Mr. Hale, you're exaggerating. Our compliance team is fully licensed. Sam cut her off with a quiet laugh that carried more weight than shouting. Licensed. You contracted a private security firm without notifying the county, without registering your operatives, and without their training certifications. These men impersonated law enforcement. That's a felony. We have the contracts, we have body cam footage, we have everything. Sam slid a small black USB drive across the table. Deborah didn't touch it. Inside, Sam continued, Her your contracts with Sentinel Enforcement Group, a company banned from operating in 3 states for unlawful raids and excessive force. It also includes email chains showing you greenlit making examples out of homeowners. That's conspiracy, Mrs. Klein. And when this hits the sheriff's desk, the county attorney, And the local news? You're done. The room went silent. Marcus stepped closer, his voice cold but steady. You have 24 hours to disband your compliance team, issue a written apology to my family, and halt all pending enforcement actions. Fail to comply, and this goes public. A thin, balding board member slammed his palm against the table. You're threatening us! That's harassment. Marcus leaned forward, locking eyes with him, his tone controlled but sharp. No. This is me telling you exactly what's coming. I don't make threats. I deliver consequences. For the first time, Deborah Klein's confident facade cracked. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for a glass of water, but she tried one last bluff. Even if you go public, you won't win. The HOA's lawyers will bury you in court for years. Sam smiled faintly. Then we'll let the FBI handle the illegal impersonation of federal officers. I'm sure they'll be thrilled to take the case. Marcus stared at her in silence for a long moment, then turned and walked out, his team following without a word. The soft click of the glass door shutting behind them was louder than any shouting could have been. But the HOA wasn't done. The next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of engines outside. He pulled back the curtain and froze. 3 sheriff's cruisers lined up along his driveway. Daniel's voice came from behind him, anxious and trembling. Marcus, what's happening now? He exhaled slowly, watching the deputy step out, one holding a clipboard. They're trying to flip the story, he said quietly. They're filing restraining orders. They want to make me the aggressor. The deputy handed Marcus a packet of paperwork, his expression apologetic. Mr. Hale, the HOA board filed a complaint against you. They're alleging harassment and intimidation. Marcus took the papers without arguing, his jaw clenching. He knew exactly what was happening. This was the board's last move, a desperate attempt to paint him as the villain. But this time, they'd underestimated who they were up against. By noon, Sam and Cole had launched Phase 2 exposure. Within hours, they had uploaded a digital dossier to a secured server, contracts, body cam footage, photos, and witness statements. They pushed the story to every major journalist in the county and handed everything to a trusted contact at the state attorney's office. By Friday morning, the story hit the local news like a thunderclap. HOA accused of running illegal paramilitary enforcement team. County investigation underway. When news vans lined the streets of Haven Ridge, neighbors who once stayed silent began speaking out. Families came forward, revealing that they, too, had been harassed, fined, and intimidated by the compliance team. What began as Marcus's fight was now a community uprising, and the pressure on the HOA board was only beginning to build. By the following week, Haven Ridge no longer looked like the peaceful suburban sanctuary it claimed to be. News vans lined the sidewalks. Reporters with cameras hovered outside the HOA headquarters. Neighbors who once waved politely from a distance now gathered in small clusters, whispering about corruption, intimidation, and the shocking truth behind the compliance team. Marcus Hale watched it all unfold from his front porch, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Danielle sat beside him, her hand resting on his knee, while Aaliyah played quietly on the grass, blissfully unaware of the storm swirling around her family. For days, Marcus had said very little, but his silence was heavier than words. Inside, Cole Jensen had set up what looked like a miniature command center on Marcus's dining table. Multiple laptops, live news feeds, and encrypted messages coming in from Sam's contacts across the county. Every hour, there was a new update. 2 more families came forward. Cole said one afternoon, scrolling through statements, same thing, fake raids, intimidation, fines stacking up, and we've got receipts showing the board members were inflating violation fees and pocketing the difference. Marcus nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. Exactly what we needed. By Thursday, the county's Special Investigations Unit announced a formal probe into the Haven Ridge Community Alliance. Subpoenas were issued. The HOA's financial accounts were frozen. A judge ordered an immediate suspension of all enforcement actions pending investigation. But the real bombshell came late Friday night. Sam burst into the living room, his phone in hand, a rare grin spreading across his face. They got him. Marcus looked up from his seat at the kitchen counter. 2 board members. Arrested an hour ago for fraud, falsifying financial statements, and unlawful contracting with Sentinel Enforcement Group. Danielle's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. They're actually going to jail. Sam nodded, dropping his phone on the counter and sinking into a chair. Oh, and get this. The state attorney's already talking about filing charges for impersonating law enforcement. Those fake HOA cops are going to have a real hard time explaining the rifles. Marcus leaned back, exhaling slowly, finally letting himself feel a moment of relief. But the fight wasn't over. The next morning, he received a call from a local journalist requesting an on-camera statement. At first, Marcus hesitated. He'd never been one for the spotlight. But Sam nudged him, his voice low and steady. "You've got the community behind you now, brother. They need to hear from you." So, that afternoon, Marcus stood in front of a crowd of reporters on the steps of the HOA headquarters, the same building where, just days ago, he'd confronted the board face to face. The glass windows behind him reflected the chaos, cameras flashing, neighbors gathering, murmurs running through the air. One reporter shouted over the noise, "Mr. Hale, do you feel vindicated now that arrests have been made?" Marcus took a breath before answering, his voice calm but strong. "This was never about me. This was about every family in this neighborhood who thought they had no voice. It's about a system that abused its power, that used intimidation instead of representation. Today isn't a victory for me. It's a victory for everyone who's ever been bullied into silence." The crowd quieted, listening intently. Another reporter raised her hand. "Do you have any message for the HOA board members who are still under investigation?" Marcus's expression hardened slightly, his gaze cutting straight through the cameras. "I served my country for 12 years to protect the rights of every American. That includes the right to feel safe in your own home, free from harassment, free from fear. If anyone thinks they can strip families of those rights, you'd better bring more than fake badges." The words hit like a thunderclap. By evening, the clip of Marcus's statement was everywhere. Local broadcasts, social media, even national news segments. It became the rallying cry for homeowners not just in Haven Ridge, but across the country. Emails began pouring in from families in other states, sharing similar horror stories about their HOAs, emboldened by what Marcus had done. Within a month, the fallout was undeniable. The Sentinel Enforcement Group lost its operating license statewide. The Haven Ridge HOA dissolved its compliance team permanently. Deborah Klein, the once untouchable HOA president, resigned under public pressure and faced her own investigation into financial misconduct. New elections were scheduled, this time allowing homeowners direct voting rights and oversight on community decisions. For the first time in years, the people of Haven Ridge had control over their neighborhood again. And while Marcus had never set out to be anyone's hero, families stopped him on the street to thank him. Parents with tears in their eyes, older couples who finally felt safe, neighbors who admitted they'd been too afraid to speak up before. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus stood in his driveway watching Aaliyah chase fireflies, her laughter echoing through the warm summer air. Sam leaned against the hood of his SUV nearby, arms folded, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Looks like you shook up more than a few people," Sam said, nodding toward the distant HOA office, now dark and empty. Marcus smirked faintly, his eyes on his daughter. "I didn't shake them, Sam. They shook themselves. All I did was stand my ground." For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt it, a sense of peace. Not because he'd won some battle, but because the community had woken up. People understood their rights now. They weren't afraid anymore. But deep down, Marcus knew this wasn't the end. It was a warning. He glanced at Sam, his voice quiet but steady. "If anyone comes for my family again," he paused, letting the silence carry the weight of his words. "They better be ready for what follows." Sam chuckled softly, patting Marcus on the shoulder. "Door's secure now, brother." As night fell over Haven Ridge, the quiet was different. Not the silence of fear, but the calm after a storm, the sound of a neighborhood reclaiming its voice. Marcus had never planned to fight a war on his own street, but when the HOA came crashing through his door, they set into motion a chain of events they could never control. And in the end, the very thing they tried to silence became the spark that burned their empire down.